In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful Podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. Artificial intelligence won't replace storytellers, but storytellers who use AI will replace those who don't. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcasts. I'm your host, Sam Pepin. Today we're diving into the future of storytelling in the age of AI, the mindset of a modern polymath, and building businesses through creativity and innovation. Our guest today is Jeffrey Borschowa, founder of Pharos Business Services Inc. and the Business Catalyst Crew. He self-describes multi-potentialite, striving towards polymath. Jeff is deeply passionate about storytelling and obsessed with the transformational power of artificial intelligence. With decades of experience guiding entrepreneurs, he now combines human creativity with emerging technology to help businesses unlock growth and connections in a rapidly shifting world. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. Your support helps more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Mr. Jeff Borschowa, welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
Great, Sam. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, it's lovely having you here, and I'm looking forward to diving into, I suppose, a very multifaceted conversation. That's what I'm expecting. But to kick us off, please tell us more about Pharos Business Services, please.
Sure. Well, thank you for asking. And Pharos is my little pet project. And basically, we are named after the Greek lighthouse of Alexandria. So Pharos is the Greek word for lighthouse. And what we do is we focus on providing insight, clarity, and growth for our clients. And believe it or not, my pet peeve, I see a lot of businesses being really busy doing things. A lot of founders saying, oh, I'm too busy for that. And what we try to do is get them to slow down and focus on their strategy first. And that to me is huge. It's kind of, we take a deep breath and we say, you're probably lost in the fog. Let's find our way together.
It's very hard to see the label when you're in the jar, as they say, right?
Yes.
Tell me, Jeff, I always love to ask my guests to bring us basically the very beginning, perhaps the genesis of all of that. Were you always amazed by strategy, biz dev? Tell me more about how everything sort of come to fruition for you in that manner.
Well, for what it's worth, I self-taught myself chess because I grew up on a farm and there weren't a lot of people to play chess with. So at probably about 10 or 11, I discovered that, you can learn how to play chess by reading an encyclopedia. Again, I'm a little older than you, so, we did what we did before the internet existed. I've always been fascinated by strategy, but then as an adult, I went into the accounting realm, and to be really blunt, what we became was the scorekeepers. We were the ones, it wasn't really, as a profession, we weren't giving meaningful advice. It was, last year wasn't so good. Could you tell me more? No, last year was terrible. Here's the numbers. And our clients were asking for forward looking, and it was fascinating because the accounting industry didn't really encourage that. And what I was told repeatedly was nobody gets sued for looking at last year's numbers because we know they're right. I'm like, that's a terrible answer. So believe it or not, after, a couple of decades in the accounting industry, and, I did a lot of autopsies when my clients went under, I was the guy who came in to clean up failed businesses.
Okay.
And I was like, I feel like we could do better. And what that brought me to, I'm neurodiverse, so I see things that other people don't see. What I realized was that a lot of the advice business owners were getting was either backwards looking, oh, you should have done this, rather than here's what you could do. Or it was very much canned, prepackaged, here's what everybody else is doing, go forth and do that. And so what I really became obsessed with probably started around 2012 was, how do I help my clients look forward and navigate those tricky waters, rather than when they're washed up on shore saying, you probably should have avoided those rocks.
Right. I want to talk about that, the fact that you're neurodivergent, as you said so eloquently, perhaps. When you think about basically not only what it is, but perhaps for you, when you were off, I suppose, how young did you sort of figure out? Was that because of the diagnostic, of more of your experience within the world, I suppose?
I self-diagnosed myself with OCD and ADHD when I was about 4.
Okay.
Because again, I was a kid on a farm, and I knew I was different.
Sure.
People kept telling me, sit still, pay attention, don't do this, don't do that. And yet my school grades were off the charts. I was always top of the class. And I'm like, how is it possible that I'm both a bad student and a good student? So I just sort of learned from an early age, and this is a spectrum thing. I learned how to hide the good in me so that people didn't judge me. But yeah, by the time I was 4, I knew I was different. By the time I was in my teens, I knew I was very different, and I learned how to hide it well. I just very recently confirmed, I never thought the labels mattered much.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last couple of years, I'm looking at, I'm a big fan of Sun Tzu and the Art of War. I want to know myself before I even worry about knowing my enemy, so-called, as they say. But I've been doing a lot of inner reflection and things. And so for me, it's just been exploring. And I'm going to be honest, I've kind of discovered that I don't think there is a visionary entrepreneur out there who doesn't have some elements of neurodiversity to them. It's kind of in our nature.
Understood. And I suppose that may rise within you this sort of multi-potentialite, perhaps, sort of mindset, which is extraordinary. And I'm bugged by the same disease. I'll tell you that much. All right. It's exact same one. But obviously for you, not only you identify as one, but your work is very clear and tangibly basically described by such a term. You're someone that basically thrives on learning and sort of creating, I suppose. And most importantly, involving across multiple disciplines and finding a way to sort of basically fuels innovations, I suppose, in storytelling and consulting and AI, which we're going to dive deeper in. For me, I believe that the future belongs to the curious. I always love that quote. I don't know who it is from, nor do I really care, actually. But I do love it for what it stands for. But for you, what advantages, perhaps, do you see in embracing, I suppose, a multi-potentialite, identity, especially in today's business world? Put some meat around the bone for me, please.
I love it. And by the way, curiosity has been the bane of my existence as a child. Everybody said curiosity killed the cat. And of course, I was always curious. It was like, what did the cat ever do to curiosity? It just seemed mean. So I am off the charts curious. And, just as to put a pin in my childhood, a lot of my teachers would say, any questions, anyone but Jeff, and it was, that sort of taught me that curiosity is not valued by society.
Right.
And I would go so far as to say, what would history be if we didn't have curiosity? Would we have left the plains of Africa? Would we have settled into Europe? Would we have explored the New World? Would we have a man on the moon? Would we have space? Would we have cars? No. We'd all be sitting in the dark in a cave going, okay, somebody passed the raw meat. I'm going to die of scurvy, but that's okay. So to me, curiosity is everything. And that's what I tell people. I don't bring the answers, I bring the questions. And that to me is, if you don't have questions, you and I don't have much to talk about. And honestly, I'm seeing this rise of neurodiverse, curious podcasters, and this is our new frontier. And, I will go so far. When I saw the word neurodiverse online, it was on somebody's LinkedIn profile. The word just grabbed me and said, you need to learn more about this word.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I learned what it meant, I was like, that's clearly me. But the other one that really grabbed me was the word multi-potentialite. I was like, I don't know what that is, but I want one, or I want to be one, or I want to have it. And that to me is the essence of being an entrepreneur. And I have a distinction between entrepreneur and business owner.
Sure.
Entrepreneurs tend to be more, if it's not broke, let's break it and tear it apart and then we'll fix it. We're curious. Whereas what I describe as a business owner is more, how do we maintain? And they're the franchise owners, and God love them, we need them, but they're the ones that are looking at 1% incremental improvement. Whereas a visionary or an entrepreneur, we're crazy enough to take a working thing apart, tear it apart, and say, why does it do what it does? And then how can we build it better, faster, leaner, whatever it is? And just to bring that home, my goal in life is to become a full-fledged polymath. Because being a multi-potentialite is great, but a polymath, you've done big things and you've actually had a big impact on the world. We look at Da Vinci, we look at Michelangelo, and again, being neurodiverse, everyone says you need to focus on one thing, you need to be an expert in one area. And I'm like, impossible. What normal neurotypical people don't see is that there's a pattern to everything I do. Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's not there. So I focus on building relationships, and my tagline is building authentic relationships. I do that with books, with podcasts, with AI, with a whole bunch of other things. But when I hear it from neurotypical people, they say, oh, you're all over the place, we can't follow you, you're clearly, I had somebody call me erratic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, just because we don't see the rhythm of the seasons, at some point the sun and the moon were mysteries to humanity. Now we set our clocks by them.
Wow. Interesting. Okay. I love the ending of that answer. That was very poetic. When you mentioned Da Vinci, and I want to philosophize with you on this, because it's quite rare that and again, I don't assign myself the neurodivergent perhaps title, nor any title actually. I'm much more of let go and let God type of person, but I do believe that there is perhaps maybe something special about the way I understand and comprehend ideas and like to, I suppose, put them in contact and intertwine them. That's one thing that I want to talk to you about. Is, to me, by far what I prefer doing the most is understanding. It's getting to a point where I don't understand, I study it, now I get it, it gives me endless joy, I'm the happiest person in the world. But on top of that understanding, one thing that is extraordinary, and maybe why basically potentialite was so attractive to you, was bridging concept together, right? You have this great quote, which is, every time basically I bring a new perspective to a problem, I come up with a better solution. And I think that's extraordinary. Where, I suppose, tell me more about the extent of it. For you, is it something that just naturally come to mind as soon as that a new concept that is interesting to you emerge? Or tell me about, I suppose, the framework of thought that you need to have in order to be able to bridge this concept together.
So I'm going to give you a couple of answers. One is a little bit crazy, and I've learned to embrace it. I can't explain it, and therefore the scientist in me struggles with it, but I will throw it out there. So first of all, everything I do is about curiosity. And I've read over and over that the question why is a terrible question, but for me, it is the only question that matters. I look at why does this happen? Why does that happen? And sometimes I don't have the answer. But what I do, and this is how I approach my AI tools, and it's how I approach everything, is I look at the problem from the narrow perspective of the person. You talked about we can't read the label while we're in the jar. I like to understand it from that perspective first.
Okay.
Because if I can understand what the person in the problem thinks is the problem, I can then throw out everything that they've already tried because I know it doesn't work. I think it was Einstein that said you can't solve a problem at the same level of thinking that created it. So what I do is I always start with where they think the problem is. And that's where neurodiversity becomes my superpower. I can look outside the problem and I orbit it, and then I look at it and say, what's the least likely area that could impact this? And, I have my favorites, but almost always, let's say we're talking about marketing. A lot of people think it's about the mechanics of marketing. I need more clicks. I need more this. I need more that. I look at it from a storytelling perspective and say, no, you need to be more interesting. What's the one thing you could change that would solve all the other problems or make them irrelevant? So I have frameworks that I use. I have my favorite tools that I use and I bring in for a problem. But for the most part, it's the curiosity of why is this problem in existence? And I'll ask a lot of questions. I love when I heard the Toyota 5 Whys, I was like, oh my God, there's literally an exercise designed around the word why. So it's part of my toolbox. But the other thing, and this is the part I can't explain, I get a download, and I'm going to say from the universe, from God, wherever it comes from, that says you need to pull on this thread first. And it's that inner voice, my gut, that I've learned to listen to that usually guides me to something unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to be able to explain it scientifically, but I've realized it's above my pay grade. I don't need to understand it. It's just when I was younger, it was a whisper and I'd ignore it and I go, shush, because I in my early days, if I couldn't prove it, it wasn't real.
Mm-hmm.
And I always had this really annoying gut instinct that would say, listen to me. And it just became a whisper and eventually it just went away. But now what I've learned to do is take a breath and let that voice come out.
You mentioned Da Vinci right away when you talked about basically who you are and some of your aspirations as a polymath. Do you think is that your biggest role model, you would say?
I would say it's a combination of Da Vinci. He's been with me the longest as a guide. Also Michelangelo and Albert Einstein. The three of them, they bring a curiosity to things. I mean, both Da Vinci and Michelangelo, I think my problem solving is guided by Michelangelo because he said, I didn't sculpt David. I just carved away the bits of rock that weren't him. And that's how I approach a problem is, okay, there's a core problem in here somewhere, the statue. I just need to get rid of the pieces that are not part of the statue.
Interesting. Yeah. So they sort of seeing it the other way around. It's that's really interesting. And talking about obviously AI, you have this concept of AI as a co-creator and not just a tool, perhaps. And when you're thinking about it, you have sort of a very similar idea to mine actually on this topic, which is AI shouldn't basically and doesn't have the capability to replace human beings and specifically not human creativity. At the end of the day, you get an answer as good as the question you ask, and therefore that's why we have prompts engineer these days and so on.
Yeah.
Is it intelligent in the sense of obviously the memory it has, but its ability to conduct perhaps sense and intellect in a beautiful depiction? Sure, but you still need to ask the right question if you want the right answer, and that will need to come from a human being. I'm sure we can talk about quantum and the fact that we might have AI talking to AI and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But I do believe that the way you describe it as a partner is something that really speaks to me. And you really explore sort of how business perhaps can use AI as a basically as a co-pilot, if you will, in your different, I suppose, tasks such as storytelling and branding, for example. Tell me more about, what do you mean by guide, I suppose? What, tangibly speaking, how do you guide basically businesses to work with AI creatively in a way, I suppose, instead of fearing it first and foremost, but also in a way that might be distinguishable from other people trying to do similar things?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, and I love the distinction. Number one, it is just a tool. So, the thing is, you can put a hammer in the hands of anybody and they'll either build something beautiful or they'll tear something down. I think AI is that tool. And, what I would say is most people aren't curious enough to get good results out of AI. And what I mean by that is I've seen many, many courses where people will say, here's my prompt templates, copy and paste, and away you go. And it's like, that is literally the lowest use of AI. I mean, it's better than none, but copying and pasting, for example, I could copy and paste the prompts that you like to use, Sam, and I'm going to get very different results than if somebody else does. So first and foremost, I think way too many people are using AI tactically, and they're saying literally, AI, you're my virtual assistant, do this thing. And honest to God, that is a 2x at best. You're going to double your efficiency, but garbage in, garbage out. You're just louder and more amplified. Whereas if you're curious, and this is where I think AI goes from being a tool to an artistic tool, if you're curious and you ask questions, and my format is really, really simple. I always start with the big picture. I've also realized that AI works a lot like a neurodiverse brain. We don't get to the point quickly. We circle the point, and we're looking at it from different angles.
Okay.
A lot of people look at and they see exactly, all I see is my hand. Well, there's more than my hand beyond my hand. So with AI, what I do is I'll ask it, who are other experts that are working on this? I always ask, who are some wildcard experts that could really throw a wrench into this? Believe it or not, I'm going to get mystical here. If I'm working on a customer service program, I'll say, what would Jesus do?
Mm-hmm.
And some people tell me that's blasphemous, and I'm like, no, it's an actual, genuinely curious question. How would Jesus approach customer service? And spoiler alert, he's not going to come after him and say, how can I extract as much money as possible? He's looking at it from, how can I help them be better?
Yes, obviously.
And so it is a fascinating thing. People think I'm a little crazy at times because I will bring in Jesus. Every now and then I bring in Buddha. I don't want to leave anyone out, so I'll sometimes say, what would Muhammad say about this? But the reality is I bring in outside perspectives, and full disclosure, people always say, oh, AI hallucinates. So do I.
So does everybody. Just point blank.
Yeah, anybody who says they don't zone out every now and then or don't go on tangents, you're lying, and just go get to know yourself a little better.
Yes.
But basically, I will have, somebody will say, well, I sat down and I asked a question, got the answer, copied and pasted, I was done. I have conversations that can go on for an hour or two.
Right. And it's so interesting you mentioned this, because we hear this comment very often. No, but AI can make mistakes. Yeah. Okay. Can you make mistake, sir? Yeah. Okay, right. That's what I thought. This sort of higher standard that because it makes the mistakes, we're not going to be talking to each other. Then, spoiler alert, you're not going to talk to anyone. My good friend. Everybody will make mistakes at some points, and specifically human beings. We're on sinful nature, and that's just the way it is. That being said, the use of AI, and to me, AI, I mean, it cannot be more. There's very few people in the world probably that use AI as much as I do from a co-creative, basically, perspective. But to me, I love, like you said, I love to converse with it. My mind is a storm, and therefore I can hold all the ideas
Yep.
to a certain level, but not to the fullest extent for me to be able to tap into it fully. So the voice message feature in AI is extraordinary. Instead of
Yep.
tapping in sort of basically a very sort of dull way because we're just people trying to make things very fast. Instead, I will basically record myself sometimes 2, 3, 4 minutes about a singular topic. For example, I was studying Newton. Big fan of Newton. In my opinion, the greatest scientist of all time. So when I was studying Newton, yes, I have a book, and yes, you can look up some files online and so on. That's all great. But when you really want to make link between concept, nothing is even remotely close. It is extraordinary at being able to document your process. I'm a big fan of Notion, for example. So all my study notes are Notions. So we can use a concept, we can pair it with image. What I always tell people is try to use more than one discipline when you're talking with AI. Shoot a file out there through sometimes text, sometimes basically use your voice. I believe it's just like a human being. The more you nourish it, perhaps the better it is on the other side, right? It's like you said, a better input, better output. That's just basic form of physics in AI or not, actually. And
in any world, right?
No, exactly. And that's what's so interesting with AI is that, to me, not only is fantastic at keeping track of my ideas, which even I have a hard time to do. That's a good thing. But then I had one, and let me know actually if you sometime have similar ideas. So I woke up, all right, it was a Friday basically morning. It was 2 weeks ago. And I woke up with a sense that I ought to know all the world's capital. Don't ask me why. I woke up I always wake up at about 4 a.m. in the morning. So it was like 4:04. And I suddenly wake up and I say, man, I just need to know all the capitals. So anyways, I went to Indigo, which is a bookstore in Canada. I don't know if there's some in the US actually, but anyways. And I went there and I purchased an atlas, and I go through the atlas and I basically nourish myself. But then with AI, and I recorded myself, it took me 44 minutes to map out the whole content of the atlas, put content, basically notions for all the diverse, basically selective field of study, the oceans, land, population, climate change, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And then also use Enki, which is basically a flashcard software to basically relate question that was in my Notion boards to basically flashcard that I can study. So I did all of that. To be about 2 hours from basically go and take the book, coming back, mapping out everything, having flashcard to study. I mean, if I had another human being doing that, that would have taken weeks, literally weeks. And it is just extraordinary how helpful it can be. And to me personally, and let me know how you feel about this. To me, it's not just about the time you winning time. I'm not a fan of this idea. I have a very hard time actually with this idea. There's this very interesting French-Canadian song actually, which is I lost my time trying to gain time. And it's true. I think a lot of people actually suffer from such a condition. And I think I currently am, but I used to be much worse, and I'm sort of working on it. But AI for me is not just a productivity tool. It's somewhat of an educational partner. It's somewhat of it's someone that I can have in my back pocket to maybe have a conversation that I know I cannot have with anyone. That happens quite often actually, where I'll be in a setting where, and I love these people. I may meet with my mother, for example. She doesn't care about politics. Maybe I saw something on the TV talking about politics. The likelihood of me having a conversation with her about it is pretty much none. Well, I can just basically go to AI, type a few things about it, and then we can converse. I just think it is extraordinary. But all of that to say that for you, tell me more about, we discussed about a few things that could be helpful, but for you precisely, if you had to give, I suppose, a sort of a blueprint as somebody that use AI, what are the best tips, the best sort of Jeff exclusive masterclass sort of tips of how to use AI effectively, not just in business, but it could, but also just as the in the nature of what the tools is built for, perhaps?
Awesome. Well, I'm going to lead in by just saying that AI is my absolute favorite playmate. It was built for those 2 a.m. I wonder moments. And I always start with, I have questions. People know that about me and they're like, oh God, Jeff's got questions. But before AI, I loved it when Google was created because you could answer some questions in a very narrow field if you knew what to ask. But now what I like about AI is you can say, look, I have this question. For example, one day I woke up at 2 a.m. and I was like, I couldn't sleep. I was wide awake for some reason. And I said, what's the most boring subject on the planet? Everybody says it's Latin, so I'm going to learn Latin.
Okay.
4 hours later, I'm like, well, that didn't help because I was deep into Latin. I'm just fascinated by it. But what I love about AI is it's up for the challenge as a mental sparring partner. So growing up, I had a really dear friend, but if I called him at 2 a.m. and said, hey, I want to talk about Latin, he would have said, get stuffed, go back to sleep, you're annoying me. Whereas AI, what I like about it, it's there 24/7, and my brain doesn't work 9 to 5 like some people seem to think theirs do. So what I love about AI, first and foremost, is I can be curious 24/7. And my little lesson, I'm an analog. I like a journal. And so one of the things I do, this is one of my top secret Jeffisms. I write in my journal and my handwriting is legible enough. I process what I think I've processed. I think the lesson and I understand this is my understanding of the thing. And then I take a picture of it and then I upload it to, I use ChatGPT more than anything. And I'll ask it to transcribe and then I'll say, okay, what are my blind spots? What am I missing? And I think what I would say, and I do that with my whiteboard as well. I'll draw on the whiteboard and I'll say, okay, here's the big picture. Now, how do I turn this into action? Because one of my favorite quotes, I swear I made it up, but I'm sure somebody smarter than me said it and it just stuck in my head, is I always say knowledge without action is wasted potential. And so for me, it's like, okay, how do we turn this new insight into action? And the other piece I'll say just for context is, we have neurodiverse brains. I'm guessing at any given point, you or I have about 1,000 different ideas swirling around in that storm.
Yes.
I liken my brain to sort of a snowstorm, and it's like, okay, I'm going to try to find that one snowflake I was looking for. What I like about AI is its brain can handle a million swirling ideas or more. And so it'll find tangents that I didn't see, and it'll bring it into the conversation. So the aha for me is I always start with, here's what I want to accomplish. So I will say, this is what I want to accomplish. For example, I want to master Latin. And then I'll say, okay, here's my background so far. Here's what I understand about Latin. And then I'll say, what are some experts that can help me understand Latin better? And it'll give me things like, linguists or Latin scholars. It'll bring in religion and things like that. And then I always ask for the wild card. So I always have a wild card category. And I'll say, what is the most ridiculously unrelated thing? And it is fascinating because it'll always bring in exactly what I needed at that moment. So, for example, it might bring in, comedians who like to play with words. And it's fascinating. And, the other weird thing I do is I always ask for a billionaire perspective. Because for whatever it's worth, people like to look down on billionaires. They complain about them. But the reality is they've created untold wealth by thinking differently.
100%.
So, I don't worry about the person that I'm suggesting, but I like to have a billionaire perspective. So what I've done is I haven't even asked the question yet. I'm still building the framework. And then I'll say, okay, based on all of our conversations so far, what are some best practices for, and I always do planning, implementing, and optimizing an outcome. And it is amazing the insights you will get. And again, people say, oh, what if it hallucinates? I'm the adult in the room, so it's up to me to say, does this make sense, yes or no? And to your point about humans, I went to a restaurant recently where the waitress was very obviously distracted, and taking our order was painful because it was like, oh, you wanted a large this? No, I wanted a large that. Like, it was like, seriously, write this down, please.
Right.
And then, after she left, the bet was, is our order going to be correct? Spoiler alert, it wasn't. If we approached restaurants the way we approached AI, restaurants are stupid, I'm never going back. Well, no, it's that feedback that you say, thank you for bringing my meal. I asked for this, not that. Could you bring me that? That's what AI is. You order until you get what you were looking for. And usually, sometimes you get the chef's surprise. And that's where the magic happens is, again, it's not I ask and AI delivers. It's a dialogue. It's a conversation. And I throw in a few, why is that important? I'm curious, why didn't we discuss this? And really, truly, if you bring that curiosity, the thing you get out of AI at the end is epic.
I love that. I've never heard about this restaurant basically reference, but you call it back to the kitchen until you get what you order. That's how it is. That's how it is. That's very powerful. And one thing that you talk a lot about is obviously storytelling. And I even hear something from you that was I thought was interesting. Obviously, storytelling is basically it's basically my livelihood. I love it so much, and it's definitely where I am basically in life today. But I really want you had sort of this opinion where you said that not only storytelling was obviously at the core of your work, but you also believe that basically storytelling is more critical now than ever before in business and leadership. Now, that's the interesting part. Why? Tell me more about why now more than ever, and perhaps everything that's sort of surround this idea of what is storytelling.
Well, I think that there's a long history. So at the heart of it, we want to think we're these highly evolved, heavily intelligent human beings. But at the heart of it, we're still those primitive cave people sitting around a fire telling stories. And what I'm seeing now, and, it's almost like the proliferation of noise. Everybody who has an opinion and a keyboard is, I'm a storyteller. And so we're hearing a lot of, I'm going to call it incongruous noise. It's kind of, somebody read a book about something once, or they watched a YouTube video, which is more modern. And they say, I'm an expert in that. And so there's a huge disconnect between the person telling the story and the story being told. And the fascinating thing about humans is we sense the disconnect. So if you get somebody up who, I know somebody who actually talks to women about going through menopause.
Yes.
Well, spoiler alert, there's no genuine sincerity in that conversation because he's sharing his story from what he's heard. It's not his story to share.
Okay.
So what I find, and again, that's an extreme example. Another example, which I'll share, is I've studied everything there is out there about neurodiversity, and just really, really clear, there is the side that is the medical side, somebody who went to university who studied neurodiversity. And I actually had a psychiatrist who was reading a chapter from a textbook to me about what my brain is and how it functions. And I stopped and I said, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but it feels very theoretical to you. I said, you're not neurodiverse, are you? And she's like, no, is that important? And I said, absolutely. Because from her perspective, my brain is a disorder that needs to be cured. And I said, between the two of us, I'm more qualified to study my brain and find ways to make it work better, because I live it 24/7. There's no textbook that's going to tell me more about being neurodiverse than what my brain tells me.
Interesting. So you're very big on live experience more than just the pure theoretical knowledge, perhaps.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you can't learn theoretical knowledge, but the reality is, and the energy is just different. Her mission in life is to cure people like us and help us get medicated so that we fit in with normal society. That energy hurts. I am repelled by it. Whereas I've met some other people who are neurotypical, and their entire energy is, how do we understand how we're different so that we can live in our superpower? There's no desire to medicate. And I'm going to say I actually annoyed her because she was going to, she said, let's suggest some tools where we can help you fit in with regular people more. And we'll come up with a medication strategy so that other people can keep up with you. And I said, fair is fair. What are we going to do to medicate the neurotypicals so that I can wait for them and they're going to keep up with me? And she was like, oh my God, I've never thought of it that way. So storytelling to me, if you actually, there's two approaches most people take to storytelling. One is it's a problem I want to solve. Or two, it's a superpower and I want to enhance it. The person who approaches my problems as a superpower is always going to magnetically pull me in faster and better than the person saying, you're broken, come here and I'll fix you.
Right. Do you think that's something that we do more nowadays than basically maybe prior times? Sort of this conventional wisdom that let me ask you this way. When you're thinking about the limits of conventional wisdom, do you think sometimes that's what's missing, this sort of misunderstanding that, well, if everybody can be an expert, then nobody truly is?
Yes.
Perhaps this sort of understanding that it's a little bit like in the Invincibles, right? The movie, the son asked his mother, his mother said, well, you know what? Son, everybody's special. He said, well, if everybody's special, then nobody is, right?
Yeah.
And do you think that's one of the limitations? And on top of that, how do we, as a society trying to make each other's flourish, how can we perhaps be a bit more intentional towards the fact that, well, no, actually, you're not an expert yet, and that's fine. Yep. There's nothing wrong with it. You're whole as a person, and you're worthy. But how do we basically go through the noise, I suppose, of this sort of misunderstanding of what expert is?
Well, I think I see the label expert as a cardboard cutout that people hide behind, and it's very one-dimensional. It's like putting up one of those masks in front of my face and saying, okay, I'm now this thing. And I think that's one of the challenges. The self-appointed, self-proclaimed experts know one thing. And by the way, I read somewhere, can't remember the source, but it said if you've read 3 books on a subject, you know more than 90% of the population.
Yes.
Well, that's great. But one of the challenges is, and I study things like scientific principles, and I'm obsessed with razors. And if you haven't heard of Occam's razor, that's a simple one that, the simplest solution is almost always the right one.
Yes.
But my other favorite is the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you're going to Google it if you don't already know it. But for those listening, Dunning-Kruger effect is people who don't know what they don't know are overly confident in how expert they are at something. Literally, and I've been guilty of this all the time, and I'll tell you how that applies to AI. I will say, what's the worst that can happen? That is a sign I don't know what the worst that can happen is. Now, on the flip side, and this is the part that my brain loves, experts know what they don't know, and what they see is their body of knowledge is small, and what they don't know is big. Therefore, they tend to be overly humble and they have humility because they know there's more to be known.
Right.
And the common saying is a one-dimensional expert knows just enough to be dangerous, because and again, and this is what I see on YouTube all the time, and I am not criticizing age, but when somebody who is 18 years old shows up and says, I'm an expert at marketing, unless their name is Sam, I don't believe them. Because again, at the age of 18, what do we know? I mean, at 18, I didn't know my butt from a hole in the ground. You don't have enough experience, whereas Sam, you've got that experience. But my question is always, do you know what the perils are? And this is a question I love to ask of experts. Why did you do that? Or what should I, because what I see all the time, and this applies to AI, a lot of the YouTube experts, and I use that in air quotes, they'll say this one thing is the be all and end all, and it's the only thing, it's the get one size fits all piece of advice. And what I immediately take away from that is you don't know why that one size fits all, and therefore you don't know what it doesn't fit.
Sure.
So, for example, maybe I have food allergies. I'm not going to go to a buffet and try everything. I need an expert who can say, go to the buffet, try this, but don't eat that because it'll kill you. And that's what I see a lot of today's experts. And by the way, there's the experts who are self-proclaimed. I don't trust them. Then there are the experts who are proclaimed by others. Somebody once asked me, do you consider yourself a thought leader? And I said, by saying yes, I negate that I am a thought leader.
Yes, 100%.
Because the minute I say, yes, I'm a thought leader, I stop feeling the need to keep asking questions. So I would avoid anybody who says, I'm a thought leader, I'm an expert. Whereas with you, Sam, I know for a fact you're an expert, and therefore if I have questions, I'm going to come to you. It is a funny thing, but with AI, more people are proclaiming I'm an expert. And the thing that scares me is they don't know the difference between a true expert and a hallucinated expert.
Yes.
So one of my favorite other Jeffisms with AI is I always ask, and this is I'll keep the language polite, but I'm not that polite. I always ask, I realize that Dunning-Kruger is a big impact and it can come and bite me in the backside if I'm not paying attention. What am I missing about this? So I'm always playing the devil's advocate saying, I think I know this. What am I missing? And it is a fascinating conversation once you start. So I'll ask things like, so I talk about compounding with AI. I talk about Dunning-Kruger. I talk about Occam's razor. And we talk about Pareto principle all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me, and again, you do flashcards with nations' capitals. I would say, Pareto principle, what is the 20% I need to learn to cover 80% of the territory?
Yes.
And then I ask for a plan on how I would learn that. And I laugh because flashcards come up.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting. The flashcards are fantastic, and I recommend Enki for those wanting to dive deeper into it. It's interesting that you say, because this is something that is extremely relevant. There's this dichotomy where at the moment basically that the mind is secure, it is in decay, right? That's Judy. His last name is very hard to pronounce. Something like Krishnamurti, if I'm not mistaken. If you listen to this, I have nothing but love for you, by the way. And he talks about this at great length, actually. That when you finally basically sort of stands boots on the ground and say, you know what, I am an expert. I am basically greatness, perhaps. It is scientifically proven and shown that your efforts basically goes down, your discipline goes down. You're much prone to take high risk, low rewards, basically sort of situations. It is just fascinating to me, the fact that this sorts of lifelong basically learner is so not only effective but so necessary for a mind to stay healthy. And obviously you've been practicing for a long time. You and I mean, we started at the same age, actually, which is what's so fascinating to me. It was at 4 myself that I understood that perhaps my intellect was something of I suppose, I wouldn't say exceptional, but exceptional from a definition term, but more, I suppose, different in his way of elaborating concept and the way I was seeing the world. And he was at 4 years south, so that's pretty cool. But I really want to talk about coming back to Pharos from a business perspective.
Sure.
What you seem to be emphasizing is very much this concept of illumination over information, right?
Yeah.
There's this sorts of the understanding that perhaps I always say this, and again, I'm sure the same thing as you, somebody more intelligent than myself said before, but when I always challenge Francis Bacon on his understanding that knowledge is power, because to me, applicable knowledge is power, and that's a very big difference. When you're thinking about it, I can consume information all day long and be one of the basically more knowledgeable person in the room. If I've never tried, if I never took risk, if I never said, all right, let's do it, Richard Branson will probably basically wipe the floor at me, even though he might not have the theoretical basically knowledge that I have. And I'm sure you would agree with that. Tell me more about basically, for you specifically, what does illumination mean in the consulting process?
I love that. And I would double down. Robert Kiyosaki has a book. When I read the title, it really offended me until I stopped and listened, and I went, oh, crap, he's right. I think the book title is A Students Work for C Students and B Students Work for Government or something like that.
Okay.
I will Google it and I'll send it to you, Sam. But the offense there was, how dare you? And then I went, oh crap, the world is full of really smart people who are stuck academically. They just, and I'm guilty of that sometimes too.
Yes.
I want to know something because I want to know something. I miss the so what or so that. So and for me, the joy of finding something, learning something new is the greatest high there is. I don't then need to do something with it. But now I'm learning with AI. I can take the joy of learning and apply it to the world. So I am a big fan of that. Now with Pharos, and I'm going to admit this, I've spent most of my life in the fog. And what I read, and again, I followed a lot of people who were self-proclaimed coaching experts.
Right.
A lot of them will tell you what you should do. And what I found was that a lot of that should didn't fit me. Again, if you believe the experts on being experts, you should focus on one thing only and be an expert at that one thing. But again, how do you become an expert at marketing if you don't understand human beings, psychology, communication, storytelling? Like there's about a dozen conversations, right?
Yes. So
the aha moment for me, and this is where I really leaned into the lighthouse, I'm not here to tell you the path to take. I'm just here to help you see through the fog so that you can be confident in the path you've chosen. And so that aha for me, and this is, again, my evolution as a coach, I'm not on this planet to say, Sam, you should do this. I'm on this planet to say, Sam, what do you think you should do? And how can I help you find that path forward? And to me, that is the greatest gift of service I can be, is I don't need to tell you how to follow my path, because for the record, I've read books you've never read. I've learned things, I've blown things up that I shouldn't have,
Right.
We all have different life lessons, and it's not about how do I copy what Sam's doing or how does Sam copy what Jeff's doing. It's how can we together say, Jeff, I see you're on this path. I don't know if you see this, but there's a problem in front of you. The greatest gift I can give somebody is help them understand, number one, their gifts, but number two, help them understand their blind spots.
Right. What you don't know is probably more beneficial than what you know, actually. And that's the whole Socrates mindset. And it's so interesting to me because there's this timeless lessons. And obviously you chose Pharos for that reason as well, to that basically sort of come intertwining basically with sort of modern philosophies. And to me, what you said about you being offended by Kiyosaki's title, I think is very interesting because you talk about this concept of building anti-fragile, basically, entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Resilience is something that we talk at great length, basically, these days, but I think it's definitely worth, basically, talking about. I think one of the favorite author that I was able to retrieve from you was Nassim Taleb, right? You really seem to draw a lot of ideas and concept from him, which he's one of my favorite authors. So you see, we're on the same, basically, brainwave from that perspective. But I really want you to tell me more about when you think about this sort of sentiment that we live in a world nowadays where, and basically fragility has been protected. Actually, that's my opinion. Has been, I wouldn't say glorified, but there's this sorts of sense that that being a snowflake basically is something acceptable, and oh no, it's okay, just don't do it because you don't feel like it. There's sort of this sense where we, I believe, misunderstand perhaps the purpose of life. That's a whole nother very big conversations. But when you think about what does it take to build an entrepreneur, not a business owner, all due respect to them, but entrepreneurs in this case, who thrives under pressure and perhaps rather than breaking down, but not only try, but it fuels them. Perhaps there's this sort of little voice, call it what you want, ego or whatever it is, of just, you know what, this is a hard time, I need to embrace it, and I'll come up basically stronger on the other side. Tell me what it takes to become such a person.
Well, I think first and foremost, and I can't remember where I heard this, but I've learned in nature, and by the way, whenever I'm stuck with something, I look to nature and go, you know what? Nature was built with more intelligence than we can possibly fathom. But really, truly, there was somebody who commented, and I've since confirmed this, but trees are best left alone. So in cities, what they do is they take a tree, they plant the seedling or sapling or whatever it's called, and then they brace it so the tree doesn't bend in the wind. The thing is, when a tree flexes in the wind, it micro breaks. So little breaks in the tree happen, and as the tree gets thicker and thicker, it becomes a sturdy tree. Whereas if you overprotect the tree and it never learns to flex, the first strong wind that hits it, when it's big enough, it falls over or it cracks. So to me, that was a big aha moment. And I approach this as a parent. I approach this with my clients. My job is not to stop you from pain. My job is to help you get through the pain.
Right.
So as an example, and I say this is to me the difference between a business owner and an entrepreneur. Business owners are deliberately playing defense, trying not to fail. Entrepreneurs are risking it all, willing to fail, knowing that quote unquote failure is a lesson that they need to move forward. And for the record, I will say this all day long. I don't trust somebody who's never made a mistake because it tells me they've never tried.
Exactly.
I have made some epic, colossal, world-ending, seemingly horrendous mistakes, and every single one of them has taught me. I love. Sorry, I'm just drawing a blank here. The inventor of the light bulb, Edison.
Edison, yeah. Mm-hmm.
He says, I didn't learn how to, I didn't invent the light bulb in one go. I learned 10,000 ways how not to invent the light bulb. That to me is an entrepreneur. Because a business owner, and, the analogy is if we had kids and kids try to walk and we go, oh, you're terrible at it, you fell over, stop trying, we'd all be laying on the ground rolling because nobody would know how to walk. Mm-hmm. Whereas an entrepreneur is like, I'm going to get up, I'm going to embrace those skinned knees, the bruised elbows, whatever. I think that's what sets entrepreneurs apart is a resilience. And I'm not saying they don't have a fear of failure, but their curiosity makes it that they're willing to risk failure so that they can get to success.
Yes. 100%. And to me, it's very interesting because you're talking about all these brilliant people, and a lot of people are discussing about the fact that, well, with the age of artificial intelligence, will we even need basically human intelligence? And obviously, both of our opinion on this, I'm putting words in your mouth, but feel free to dismiss it if you don't like it. Is while basically AI is advancing fast, incredibly fast, faster than the human mind by far, and doubling basically the knowledge of human beings. It really depends on which research you take a look at, but in anywhere from like 4 to 6 months, basically the world knowledge double. I heard numbers as low as 90 days, but the thesis was a little bit clunky. So anyways, that's another conversation. When you think about basically intelligence in such a narrow manner, which is only the retention of information, yes, AI has us already beat. And I say that actually to my partner, and he's 63 years old, incredible gentleman, and he was disagreeing actually with me on this. But I said, you don't understand how powerful AI is. I can promise you, all human beings, 8 billion of us, we can be against AI, and we ask general knowledge, basically questions, and we will lose to it. Because it is built to retain upon theoretical knowledge. It is exceptional and solely built for that perspective, and therefore much better than you and I, even though we're above average in memory, perhaps, by a large margin. It's not even close. And we need to understand that, but also understand what that means in an evolving world where we can value other things now that we have basically this workload and labor being basically outsourced to technology. And I'm really wondering for you specifically, what human traits do you think will grow in value as AI becomes more dominant?
I love the thought process and the question, and I agree totally. I'm just going to say, and again, I can't remember where I heard this, but I believe it 100%. AI is going to usher in an unprecedented era of prosperity and abundance.
I agree.
And the reality is, and I'm just going to say, one of the things the Industrial Revolution taught us was time scarcity. I work for an hour in the factory. I punch the clock. You pay me for whatever my labor's worth. The reality is, and I think this is exciting, we're going to let go of the concept that time is money. And again, to me, leverage is money. And the thing is, when you have a time is money model, we're all built with scarcity because we all have 168 hours in a week. So I think the thing that's going to come out, and yes, I know that AI can write songs, it can create music, it can sculpt and things like that. But the reality is, and I think we're going to have, we're going through a knowledge evolution, revolution, whatever you want to call it. We're going to let go of time as a concept. And instead of, like right now, the post-industrial world, it's about time, everything's scarcity. How can I work more? How can I get more done? The reality is, I think we're going to get into the space of how can we be better? And really, truly, this is going to sound metaphysical. I think we're going to see more love. I think we're going to see more of the human emotion. And honestly, I think we're going to learn how to communicate at the heart level, not just the mind level.
Okay, so you think we will lose the concept of time? Tell me more about that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I think, and again, I can write. So my first book I ever wrote took me 18 months, and I agonized. It was painful. The last book I wrote, and again, it was AI assisted, took me about an hour. So the reality is, we're compressing time to the point it doesn't matter anymore. Like when somebody says, I've written, in the month of February, I wrote 40 books. For the record, people will go, are they any good? I don't know. But each book helped me solve a problem, and that's how I process. I learn, I study, and then I write what I learned about. And if it helps someone else, great. But honestly, most of these books I wrote for my kids so that when they're adults, they're going to look back and go, wow, that's what we believed was possible then.
Wow.
But the reality is, again, people are so used to paying for the time, the input. What we need to recognize is the value is the output. So, as in the old days, my grandfather was a grave digger. It would take 2-3 days to dig a grave with a shovel.
Mm-hmm.
And in Saskatchewan winters, when the ground's frozen, forget about it. You can't bury somebody in winter. You have to wait for spring or summer. Well, then my grandfather bought a backhoe and he could dig a grave in about 20 minutes. And the funny thing is, people were like, oh, it used to take you 4 days. We paid you. I'm not kidding. He'd make 10 cents an hour.
Wow.
When he was digging with the backhoe, they wanted to pay him what he used to get as a manual grave digger. And he's like, no, it's worth more now. So I think that's what we're going to see, is the loss of those low-level minimum wage jobs.
Yes.
We're going to lose the scarcity of, people like, oh, I'm competing to move up the corporate ladder. I envision in my lifetime, maybe not, but in yours, the corporate ladder is going to vanish because nobody's going to care about inputs and scrambling up that ladder. If you're the world's best at one thing, be the world's best at that one thing, and the world will find you. As opposed to, and again, multi-potentialites, we're going to be the world's best at 10 things. The world will find us. I don't need to do the other 990 things that I'm good at. So
that's fantastic. Yeah, that's so interesting. It's one of the, I love this because it's challenging my own notion of reality, which happens very little. That's why I'm pausing here. No, it's true. I suppose that's a conversation I would like to dive deeper into with you offline, certainly. So we'll keep that one in the book. But no, this is absolutely fascinating. I never heard anything like this. But I think it's very interesting, and I agree with you with your overall premise. Perhaps your conclusion, I believe, could be discussed. But I do agree that this concept of first of all, very dangerous job. If we can outsource it to basically technology in which perhaps do not put the life of a human being, which is extremely valuable, at great danger, that's a net positive. I believe that even in the medical field, for example, a lot of disease will be solved basically by an algorithm that will understand and basically create a logic in which we can understand and therefore treat cancers and others. I believe that wholeheartedly. I believe this AI is going to be one of the most consequential elements, service, product, whatever you want to call it, in the history of mankind. I do believe such thing. And I think it's actually hard to dismiss at this point, but there's still some people that tries. And that is not even talking about the fact that once it's paired with quantum computing, then it's not even, you can't even hold the concept is too big for you to just hold it in your mind as a human being. That's how big it is. And therefore I believe it's gonna be sensational. I'm an internal optimist, so perhaps typically the world proves me wrong at some point, but I do.
If I may, Sam, the world hasn't proved you right yet.
Exactly,
because I am an optimist too.
That's what they say. That's the optimist. The pessimistic says, "Well, the world proved me right," and then the pessimistic say, "Well, the world hasn't proved me right yet." Sure, perhaps let's use this way, and it's better for my way of thought. So why not? But Jeff, I would really want you to tell me. Obviously, you've been doing that for a long time, but it seems to me like you're just starting, and that's what I appreciate so much about you. Is every time I talk with you, I can see myself just the 20-year-old guy that just try to perhaps innovate and find ways to make the world a better place. You have this very youthful energy about you, perhaps, and that's a big compliment. Not a childish, a youthful one. And when you think about it, I would really love for you to expand upon what would you say to young people who feel pressure to specialize early in life and feel this weight on their shoulder that perhaps they didn't crack the code yet, let's say they're in their 20s as we speak, feel this pressure that perhaps there are less of, or a misunderstanding of what their real value is. Please philosophize with me on that.
Well, and for what it's worth, I have a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old, and we are having these very real conversations right now. And so this is evolving. Ask me tomorrow, it's a very different conversation than one you get today.
Okay.
Time is an artificial construct. And for what it's worth, most humans treat life like it's a sprint, and somewhere somebody's got a stopwatch, and the start button goes the day you're born, and you got to run as fast as you can to get as far as you can. The reality is, I'm telling my boys to stop and enjoy where they are. And that to me is the quintessential human being. We need to stop and be, rather than, chase the next thing. And for the record, I'm not, I tell people I'm the hardest working, lazy person you'll ever meet. I don't have that pressure of I got to get this done or I have to finish this. Now it's about taking it slow and enjoying the journey. And I would say that for anybody of any age, the reality is the journey is all that matters, and who you're on that journey with is all that matters. I know young savants or young people who, they want to be the world's youngest this or the world's youngest that. They're also the world's loneliest this and that, and that to me is the relationships I've brought along with me have made every journey worthwhile. And it's the people who are there with you in the dark times that will be there with you in the bright times that matter. So that to me would be the big advice, is just slow down and ask yourself, does this really matter? If I win this thing, will it matter tomorrow? If I lose this thing, will it matter tomorrow? And really, truly, and this sounds cliche, but if you don't love something, why the hell are you going to spend your time and attention on it?
Extraordinary. It is not intelligence, but empathy that makes us truly human. Dalai Lama. Jeff Borschowa, was an absolute blast to have this conversation with you. Time flew, as you're able to see on the top of your screen. And I so appreciate and thank you, obviously, for joining us on the Meaningful Podcast. And I would love for you to perhaps share some last words of wisdom.
I'm going to paraphrase Sun Tzu, and for the record, The Art of War, the great victory is not fighting a war, but avoiding a war. My favorite quote is, strategy without tactics is the slowest route to defeat. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. And so I always encourage people to have your strategy first and then action, not the other way around.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.